This is the Indian FTR Sport, not the first nor the second, but I think I'm right in saying the third major update to this line of bikes. So is it better than ever, or have they made so many changes now that it's too far from the concept of the original? Well, I've had this one for the past couple of weeks to find out, and so in this video I'll tell you absolutely everything that you need to know. Now, one of the features that has stayed pretty much constant through the 5 or so years that this bike has been available is the engine. It's their big 1203cc liquid-cooled 60-degree V-twin, and man is it punchy. About 120 horsepower peak, roughly 120 newton meters of peak torque, and it's delivered with such a direct and snappy throttle response that it never fails to entertain. There's always more pulling power, even when you get up to 60 or 70, and I think it's fair to say it's one of my favorite engines on the market when it comes to just pure out and out fun. Now granted, it isn't the most refined. It does feel a little bit fidgety at a steady throttle if you're going at a constant speed. It's a bit of a handful sometimes at lower speeds, but realistically that's not what they've really built it for. It's not a commuter or a weekday bike. It's meant to be fast and responsive and a little bit silly, and it delivers all that in spades. They also haven't made too much of a change when it comes to the fundamentals of the chassis on this iteration, with pretty much the same steel trellis frame and a beautiful trellis swing arm, which is a bit of a rarity and it does look very nice. And then you've also still got the fuel tank running from here down under the seat, and the rest of it is more so an airbox cover, and that's to optimize weight distribution and help to keep the mass of the fuel low. And then it's all suspended on a chunky 43mm upside down fork from Sachs, a piggyback shock from Sachs as well, and both are fully adjustable so you can get the ride dialed into your exact taste. Now it's also worth adding that you get 17-inch wheels front and rear on this bike, and that might sound pretty obvious. Most bikes do get 17 inches, but it hasn't always been the case for the FTR. Back when it was introduced in 2019, they were playing off the flat track image massively, and so they fitted it with a 19-incher at the front and an 18 at the rear. It wasn't until 2022 that they gave the road bias variants in this lineup 17 inches at both ends, but I'd definitely say it's done the trick. It feels more direct at the front and quicker to turn in, and there's far more grip at the rear on that Metzler Sportec M9RR than there was on the skinny flat track inspired Dunlops on the first generation. Now granted, you have lost a little bit of the looks of the original bike, and that is a bit of a shame because there aren't really any other flat track inspired machines on the market, but I think realistically most people who've ridden both of those bikes will say that this is far and away the better road bike, a much better feel on tarmac, and you've also got that infinitely bigger choice of tyres when it comes to road and sports tyres. Now that 2022 update also had a bit of an impact on the ergonomics, because naturally having smaller wheels it's going to sit a little bit lower, but they also took a bit of travel out of the suspension as well. With the first generation I think trying to have a little bit of off-road ability, but from 2022 on they didn't deem it necessary. So whereas the first generation actually sat pretty tall in the seat, it was 840mm, which I think is a bit above a lot of people's comfort zones, these road-focused models now sit at 780mm, which is much more accessible, and also I'd expect a more tempting proposition to existing Indian customers who are used to low-slung cruisers and tourers. For me it certainly feels more natural and easier to get on with day in day out. I'm about 5'9" or 175 centimeters, so that'll give you some idea of how it'll fit you. But yeah, for me it's super easy to flat foot either side, and it's quite narrow in the waist here as well. The only thing I will say about the ergonomics that I don't always get on with massively is the foot peg position. They're pretty high up. You'd imagine they've done that to give it decent ground clearance for quicker riding, but they're also set fairly far back. And while it does give it a certain sportiness, which sometimes is appreciated, I've got to say when I borrowed the FTR Rally as a long-termer last year and I had the opportunity to do a few longer motorway rides, it does start to feel a little bit cramped after a couple of hours in the saddle. Now, like I said earlier, with regards to the engine, it really depends what you're buying this bike for, and I wouldn't imagine too many people are thinking of buying an FTR to go touring or do massive motorway stints, but it is worth knowing about if you do. For shorter, sharper rides, you know, a couple of hours, I find it perfectly comfortable, and I do like this wide and flat handlebar position. Now, speaking of comfort, I just want to give a massive thanks to today's video sponsor, and that's Flying Eyes. They make these incredible glasses that are absolutely perfect for bikers. Because if you ever wear glasses or sunglasses inside your helmet, I'd be very surprised if you haven't had that irritating temple pressure that can lead to headaches after an hour or two, and that can become really quite distracting when you're riding. These bad boys are made from resilamide, which is a super flexible material, and that means that they can curve inside your helmet around the contour of your temples, and you really don't even notice that you're wearing them. It's also super strong, and so it means that they can make the arms just about 1 millimeter thick, and so even if you don't have glasses channels inside your helmet, they just slide in so easily. Then you got the fact that they're super robust. I mean, they just spring back to their normal shape no matter how much you bend them, and so as a biker, sometimes if you're taking your helmet off when you've stopped, you might have to momentarily chuck your glasses in your pocket or in your bag without the case, and you don't want something that's just going to get squished. So yeah, excellent glasses. I wear mine pretty much all the time. These are the Ninox narrow frames, but they've got a whole bunch of different styles and sizes and colors on their website, so there should be something to suit every taste. Also on the website, you'll find their excellent clip-on sunglasses, and that means you can quickly switch between regular glasses and sunglasses without having to take your lid off. And it also means you don't need a separate pair of prescription sunglasses. They also make these in a few different colors of lens, so it's like having multiple sunglasses. So yeah, they're a fantastic bit of kit. I absolutely love wearing mine, be that on the bike or off the bike. And the benefit of these super thin arms is even handy when I'm sat at my desk editing, for example, with headphones on. So look, do check out the link down in the description below if you like the sound of them, and you'll also find down there a 10% discount code specifically for my viewers. So once again, a massive thanks to Fly Nice for their support. And with that, back to the FTR. So look, what's actually new on this 2023 model? Well, you can see there's been quite a striking update to the aesthetics. You've got a new punchy paint option. This one's white with a little bit of black and red on the tank, and also these pop-in red wheels. And while it is a big departure from the original flat track stylings where they had that burgundy color and the black and the gold, I actually think I really like it, and it's sort of matured into its own thing, and it's got a little bit of the vibe of a sort of American muscle car to it. Now they've also added a little bit of extra bodywork, so you now get this fly screen, there's a belly pan down the bottom, and you get the single seat cowl as well. And again, I think it all works quite nicely together and enhances the look. The only downside I will say is that this generation is about 5 kilograms heavier than the previous generation S, so it's 223 kilograms dry, I think it's about 237 wet, and that's up on the 218 kilograms dry of the S model. But look, this has always been a pretty chunky bike in comparison to other sporty nakeds, and so I wouldn't say it's been a massive change in character out on the road. The other version of this bike that's available for 2023 is more so like a muted black and grey with a little bit of red, but I'd say this sort of louder, more popping paint job really does better suit the aggressive nature and riding style of this bike. Now a few other key upgrades, and one of them is the clutch, and I did used to find it a little bit keen to engage and grabby, and therefore quite hard work at lower speeds. But for this model year, it's been updated with, in their words, better feel and better performance. Now I do think it has been improved a little bit. It's got slightly better manners, but I will say it is still pretty direct. It always takes me a little while when I get on an FTR after riding another press bike for a while to just recalibrate. But again, like I say, it is meant to be lively, it is meant to be responsive, it is meant to be aggressive, and so you wouldn't necessarily expect a lot of soft edges. Now the braking setup might look familiar at first glances. It's pretty much the same 4-pot radially mounted Brembo calipers up front on 320mm discs. You still get the Brembo radial master cylinder as well, and there's a single 2-pot Brembo at the rear. But they do say they've made some tweaks to the setup. They don't really give any specifics, but maybe we're talking pads or hoses or that kind of thing, with which they've tried to deliver a firmer feel on the front brake. Now I do seem to remember from riding previous generations that the braking wasn't quite as good as I was expecting from a full Brembo setup, whereas with this bike I've found it to be perfectly fine. Plenty of feel, plenty of power, just what you'd expect from a premium sporty bike of this nature. I would like to ride them back to back to really feel the comparison, but from what I can tell from trying this bike out, it does seem to have done the job. Now another big update has been here in the cockpit, and that's with the TFT display. The previous generation got a big rectangle, and I never really thought that it fit the overall aesthetic of the bike that well. New for 2023 on this bike and also the carbon version and the FTR Rally, we've got this round TFT display which you might recognize from some of their cruisers like the Chief lineup. But specifically on the FTRs, they've lifted the position a little bit to make it more easily visible. And I will say in the sort of analog style layout that you can get on this TFT dash, it is nice and easy to read and it's nothing more than a quick glance down. I guess what's cool about it being a TFT though is that while you've got that classic round look, beneath that you've got plenty of menus to help you control stuff like the riding mode. So you've got range, standard and sport, and also some of the rider aids so you can switch off the lean sensitive traction control, for example. Then you've got connectivity features to control, but also their proprietary map system, which doesn't actually need a connection to a phone to get data to run the maps. It is a really nice option to have if you don't want the clutter of mounting your phone on the bars. And while it isn't quite as neatly done or as intuitive as something like Google Maps, nor is it as comprehensive, I guess that's the trade-off for having a clean cockpit. Overall, I think it's a big change for the better because one of the things that's going to sell this bike is the looks, and this fits in much better than the big old rectangular slab. Now, another change for all the FTRs this year is that they now get what they're calling the sport exhaust. Perhaps they had to change it to comply with emissions regulations, but they also took the opportunity to improve the look, and I do think it looks quite a bit better. The previous gen had the sort of matte black on the main barrel there and then bare metal tips, whereas this is the other way around, and I think it just looks a little bit more high quality and premium. Out on the road, it does sound pretty good. I wouldn't say it's the loudest, as you'd expect from a stock system, but it does have some nice bark to it, and also occasionally you get these nice burbles and pops on deceleration. Clearly it won't do the trick for someone who really does like a big bassy boom from their V-twin, but for a stock system it's decent, and I will say it does look pretty nice, especially with those bronze headers. I think all those changes are decent improvements, and they do combine for what I think is a substantially improved riding experience. But what about the other bikes in the FTR lineup? Well, as the entry point, you've got the base FTR, that's $12,995, and while you do get a lot of the same fundamentals like the engine and a lot of the chassis, the dash and the electronics are quite stripped back, and I think that's something that personally I'd want on a bike at this level. Next above that, you've got the Rally model at $14,995, and that does still come with the 19-inch at the front and the 18 at the rear. It's a little bit more off-road biased, it sits a bit taller, the wheels are spoked, and it comes with semi-knobbly Pirelli Scorpion Rally STR tires. And so look, if you like the whole scrambler vibe and you do think you might take it occasionally to do some light off-roading, then that's the one to look at. But for me, the road bias of this version makes it the much better bike for 99% of riding. Then in terms of price order, you've got this at $15,295, and then the absolute top dog is the FTR R Carbon at over 16.5 grand. Now look, you do get some nice fancy extras that do make it look a little bit more bling. You've got the carbon bodywork and the nice stitching on the saddle, but I think on this occasion, less is more. I think this is actually a better looking bike, and I prefer the red on the wheels than the grey on the FTR Carbon. I think the red just helps it to pop a bit more. Now I will say £15,295 is a lot of money, and there are plenty of other bikes that you could get, but the thing with the FTR is it's always been a bit of a unique blend, and so if you've ridden one and you like it, then it's going to be difficult to find anything that scratches that exact same itch. I will say that this FTR Sport has moved quite substantially away from the original. You probably wouldn't really call it a flat tracker anymore, but it's sort of maturing like a fine wine. It's getting better with age, and I think they've turned it into more of a usable all-round road bike that really does deliver on grim factor. As always though, I'd love to know what you think of it, so do let me know down in the comments below. And if the Scrambler style Rally does sound like your sort of thing, then I'll link to my review on the screen here so you can give it a click and give it a watch. Do hit subscribe if you've not already if you want to see more motorcycle reviews like this right here on YouTube. Many thanks for watching today, and we'll catch you in the next one.